Mid-January this year, the world economic elite came together in Davos. While the focus usually lies in discussions about topics of economic nature, this year the state of the world overshadowed every other topic. In their global risk report, a looming food supply crisis is one of the top 4 threats facing the world in 2023. But is this true? These are the prices for the fertilizers for the past 8 years. The war in Ukraine has led to an increase of cost of almost 200% in 2022. Farmers warn that we blindly walk into a catastrophe. Climate change, a growing global population, and volatile food and energy prices may push millions more vulnerable people into extreme poverty and hunger by 2030. If everyone shared the diet of the average American, the world could feed just 2.5 billion people. But what do you know about how our global food system works? This is the story of your food, and we are going to uncover why we may not have enough of it left in the future. Welcome to Dark New World. The World Food Programme warns that there were 282 million people facing extreme food insecurity at the end of 2021. At the end of 2022, it stood at around 345 million. According to Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, the world may soon experience a scarcity of food, partly because of rise in cost. The production of nitrogen fertilizer has significantly decreased as a result of harsh restrictions placed on natural gas exports from Russia, which is also a critical component for the global food production. Productivity among farmers, as well as crop replacements and fertilizer usage, have all seen considerable drops in recent years. In this video, we will take a look at the role of fertilizers in the global food supply, the ongoing shortages and the rising demand, the effects of climate change, geopolitical chaos, and a growing world population, and finally, we answer the question, can we really save the planet and feed humanity with our current numbers? Because the question remains unanswered. Can we keep our standard of living and save our future? The global food system that feeds us was first established after the Second World War. The Third Agricultural Revolution, also called the Green Revolution, was a period of technology transfer initiatives that saw greatly increased crop yields and agricultural production in the 50s and 60s. Back in the 1950s, the world population just reached 2.5 billion people. But in the second half of the 20th century, we saw a massive increase in human population numbers all over the world, probably hitting 10 billion by 2050. Without the Green Revolution, we wouldn't have been able to reach these numbers. And one big aspect of this is the use of fertilizers. Fertilizers are substances that are used to enrich the soil with nutrients essential for plant growth. Inorganic fertilizers can be further classified into 3 categories: nitrogen-based, phosphorus-based, and potassium-based fertilizers. The use of fertilizers can have significant impact on crop yields and overall plant health. However, it is important to use fertilizers responsibly and in accordance with recommended application rates. Overuse of fertilizers can lead to environmental damage and can also result in the buildup of salts and other harmful substances in the soil. The man behind the idea of the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, a Nobel Peace Prize winner and agronomist, is credited with saving over 1 billion people worldwide from starvation. Borlaug continually advocated increasing crop yields as a means to curb deforestation. Assuming that global food demand is on the rise, restricting crop usage to traditional low-yield methods would also require at least one of the following: the world population to decrease, either voluntarily or as a result of mass starvations, or the conversion of forest lands into cropland. And is thus argued that high-yield techniques are ultimately saving ecosystems from destruction. But fast forward to 2023, deforestation was not stopped, and 8 billion people dwarfed the number of the 2.5 billion in the beginning of the 1950s. Even the least developed countries have a now high use of fertilizers to support their rapid growing populations. The global south is growing fast, and with every human born, the stress level on our food supply and our environment is increasing. And the event that can turn everything upside down already happened. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not like any other conflict we had in the past 80 years. While Russians and Ukrainians die in the thousands on the battlefield, the war has not revealed its scariest weapon yet: hunger. In late 2020, fertilizer prices began to rise due to a combination of factors. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a decline in fertilizer demand during lockdowns, but as restrictions were lifted and crop prices rose, demand rebounded. Meanwhile, on the supply side, the prices of natural gas and coal key feedstocks and energy sources in fertilizer production were increasing, and there were also some reductions in production capacity. By the time the Russian invasion occurred on February 24, 2022, fertilizer prices were already at historical high levels. The outbreak of war had a significant impact on prices, driving them even higher. Russia and Belarus are all important producers of all three major fertilizer nutrients: urea, phosphate and potash. In 2020, Russia accounted for 14% of global trade in urea and 11% of trade in phosphate. With a small number of countries producing a large share of internationally traded fertilizers, the sector is vulnerable to trade shocks. Many countries, heavily dependent on fertilizer imports from Russia and Belarus, feared an immediate shortfall and had to scramble to secure alternative sources from a very tight global market. However, the impact of the trade shocks created by the war reverberated around the world, as around 3/4 of all countries import at least 50% of their fertilizer consumption. Global markets were disrupted by various types of export restrictions imposed by certain countries eager to maintain domestically produced fertilizer for domestic consumption. These restrictions included outright bans and onerous inspection and licensing processes. In June 2022, around 20% of global fertilizer trade was affected by these restrictions. Of particular note were the fertilizer export restrictions implemented by China, which led to a significant reduction in exports from mid-2021 onwards. In 2022, Chinese exports of diammonium phosphate, short DAP, which typically account for 30% of global DAP trade, dropped by 43% compared to 2021. In the same time frame, Chinese urea exports decreased by 47%. These restrictions on Chinese fertilizer exports had a major impact on global markets, exacerbating the already tight supply and demand balance. The food price index experienced a decline in the early phase of the COVID-19 pandemic due to uncertainties faced by commodity markets, according to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization's 2022 World Food and Agriculture Report. However, between May 2020 and March 2022, the index surged to its highest ever value at 159.7 points. Only about 25% of food prices at grocery stores are directly attributable to underlying commodity prices, meaning that increases in prices of commodities like corn can affect the cost of feeding livestock and impact the prices of meat and dairy products. The surge was sparked more by the pandemic's effect on supply chains before rising in conjunction with a rebound in activity and demand experienced in 2021. While food prices have returned to pre-war levels, they have not returned to pre-pandemic levels, when prices were considerably lower. So, let's imagine we can handle this crisis. What then? Well, let's talk about climate change and demographics. Because even if we manage to handle short-term disruptions like the war in Ukraine, and we don't experience additional crises or conflicts, like another war in a food exporting country like Ukraine, then there are several other crises waiting for us. The obvious one is climate change. Climate change is contributing to Africa's food crisis in several ways. Rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns are having a significant impact on agriculture. Around 95% of Africa's farmers rely on rainfall and lack irrigation systems, making them particularly vulnerable. Before 1999, a poor rainy season occurred every 5 to 6 years. Today, farmers struggle with a lack of rain every 2 or 3 years, leading to a decline of 34% in agricultural productivity due to climate change, which is more than any other region according to the United Nations. Especially the Horn of Africa has been affected by the drought, with lack of rain in Ethiopia, Kenya and Somalia, reaching the worst levels in at least 70 years. 4 consecutive rainy seasons have failed, and the next is also expected to fail. Almost half of Somalia's population is considered food insecure, and experts warn that famine could reemerge in several districts this year without additional humanitarian assistance. Climate change also threatens African marine and freshwater fisheries, on which millions of Africans rely for food. Extreme weather events such as floods and droughts have become more frequent and severe in Africa, killing livestock, damaging crops and affecting food production. For example, Pakistan was hit with a catastrophic monsoon floods in August 2022, affecting 33 million people. Nigeria experienced a delay in rainfall in 2021, which reduced its harvest by over 65%. In Latin America, expected above-average rainfall in parts of Guatemala and Honduras increases the chances for flooding in low-lying areas in 2023. There are reports that emphasizes the need to overhaul the global food system, which includes transforming how food is produced, managed and consumed. It identifies three main gaps that must be addressed in order to achieve a sustainable food system: the food gap, the land use gap, and the greenhouse gas emissions gap. But by 2050, the global population is projected to reach nearly 10 billion, and global food demand is expected to surge by 56%. If food production remains unchanged, an area of land equivalent in size to 2 Indias would need to be cleared and converted into crop and livestock production to meet this demand. But the clock is ticking, and with just 30 planting seasons remaining before 2050, urgent action is needed to address these gaps and secure the future of the world's food supply. And to answer the final question, can we feed humanity? That's the big problem we have. We need to change so many fundamental things on a global scale, and at the same time, we face existential threats like never before. This will certainly be a big problem for us. Having one problem like climate change is hard enough to solve in a peaceful world. Everyone wants to keep their standard of living. Everyone wants someone else to reduce consumption. And then there's capitalism, the machine that needs to be fed. Addressing these challenges will require a multifaceted approach that includes sustainable agriculture practices, investments in infrastructure and technology, efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and policies that promote food security and equitable access to food. Without action, the global food systems may struggle to meet the needs of a growing population in a changing climate and increasingly unstable geopolitical landscape. And as I'm looking at the world right now, it doesn't give me much hope that we're able to achieve these goals. One of the main reasons is the complexity of the issues at hand. Climate change, for example, is a global phenomenon that involves many different factors, from carbon emissions to deforestation to changing weather patterns. Finding solutions to this complex problem requires a coordinated action across different sectors and regions, as well as significant changes to our economic and social systems. Then there are powerful interests that may resist change, or that may prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. For example, some agricultural companies may resist efforts to adopt sustainable farming practices if they perceive them as less profitable, while some governments may prioritize economic growth over environmental protection. And let's not forget that we are in times of fundamental change. And usually, these times won't go by without a bigger conflict. But our environmental, political and economic problems are so big that we need to have a peaceful and united world. And the world won't be peaceful and united. It will be the opposite. And while we all prepare for conflict, more and more people will suffer from hunger. In the end, our diets will change. Meat will soon be a luxury again, at least for some of us. And everyone will try to keep as much luxury as one can. But can we feed humanity? No, we can't. If there's a miracle, and we can bring the world together, and we can force the industry to apply what the planet needs, and we find the common ground to start immediately, then there's a chance that we could. But I think you just realized how far off into fantasy land that thought is. What's not a fantasy is the conflict in Ukraine. And in this video, I talk about a potential scenario how the war in Ukraine could escalate into a world war. On the right, I talk about the rich and powerful, and why they don't want to fix climate change. My name is Dennis, thank you for watching and goodbye.